Okay, so why is Harold Bloom part of the Art and Authors unit? One of the reasons Harold Bloom is part of the Art and Authors unit is that for Harold Bloom, every work of art is one author trying to outdo another. It's one author saying, this person before me got it wrong, and I have arrived to fix their story in the form of my story. It's a battle between authors for power, and what authors do is the modern author takes power away from the earlier author by twisting his work into a new shape. And if you do this correctly, then the older author is just a footnote to your awesome work. You might think about hip hop artists trying to outdo one another. Somebody did something, well, they're going to do a better version of the same goddamn thing. Um, and everybody's kind of trying to outdo each other and create something kind of new. Let's take a look at some more of Harold Bloom's language and kind of leap in here. I'm going to skip these. These six things are the moves that people make, but let's go down here and look at this stuff. If to imagine is to misinterpret, and again, Bloom thinks all imagination is misinterpreting, changing, twisting older works of art, which makes all poems antithetical to their precursors. That means every work of art is a response to a precursor is something earlier, and antithetical is antithesis. It is against all. And one of the things about Bloom is that everybody's against each other all the time. There's no friendly. I was really inspired by this, and I wanted to create my own thing. It's always saying this previous person fucked up, and I'm going to fix it. It's aggressive. It has to be aggressive for Bloom because under Bloom, Bloom really feels like you have to make, in that first sentence, you have to make imaginative space for yourself. Everybody did everything already. So how are you going to find room for yourself? You're going to do it by going in and finding the errors in the previous person's work. And as soon as you find an error or a mistake or something that needs fixing, now you have something to do. Now you are necessary. Now you are needed. Your story, your movie, your poem is needed. So let's jump down to the bottom on the page here. He says, then to imagine after a poet is to learn his own metaphors for his act of reading. Criticism necessarily becomes antithetical also, a series of swerves after unique acts of creative misunderstanding. One of the things that's worth thinking about, and this is really more complicated than our class, but the works of art, if every artist misinterprets previous art, then that's basically what you're doing in your papers too, right? You have like a weirdo interpretation of a work of art, right? You'll write some paper and you'll have some thesis statement, and maybe the author of the thing you're writing about would be like, this is wrong, I don't agree with this, but it's like your idea about what's going on in that movie. It's your idea about what's going on in Hamlet. It's your idea about what's going on in that play, or that TV show or that novel. Every student is interpreting works of art in their papers. Well, then you're doing fundamentally the same thing artists are doing, because if every work of art is an interpretation of a previous work of art, and every essay that you write for school is an interpretation of a work of art, then essays are a form of art. And you're essentially doing the exact same thing, which is you're finding your own personal interpretation of the work of art. It's also worth pointing out that part of this has to do with obsession, and part of this has to do with love, which is fucked up. But part of this is that the works people are responding to are not necessarily things they have chosen. Your favorite works of art, you may feel like, choose you. And that finding a powerful work of art that really matters to you is like falling in love. You don't have control over it. You just can't stop thinking about this movie. You can't stop thinking about this novel. You can't stop thinking about this poem. I didn't pick Shakespeare exactly. I just couldn't stop thinking about Shakespeare. And then after a while, I looked down and I was like, holy shit, did I read 100 books about Shakespeare and watch 85 movies? Yes, I did. You get obsessed with something. You read it deeply, you study it, and then you find out where to twist or where to do something new. So some of this is, how do I put this? Involuntary. You might think about it. Think about the ways in which the family in which you grew up influenced who you are. Think about the ways, and if you know Freud, this is a big part of Freud. Think about the ways in which your family in which you're. Think about this. Is your personality, the things you believe, are they a response to your parents? Do you have an antithetical relationship to your parents, where the things you believe you're twisting what they taught you into your own personal thing? For Bloom, all art, the relationship between you and your parents is the relationship between a work of art and a previous work of art. And just like you didn't get to pick your parents, you don't get to pick the work of art either. Sometimes it just seizes your imagination and you can't stop thinking about it. And so you make your version of that thing. Um, okay, so let's take a look at some of Bloom's language a little bit more here. All right, so he says, the first swerve is to learn to read the great precursor as his greater descendants come. I'm not doing that. The second is to read the descendants. I'm not doing that either. Okay, I'm going to turn the page. Give me 10 seconds to do that. I'm going to put the camera on me here so you don't, hey, all right, that's exciting. Boy, this selfie stick is really working wonders. I'm like all the way over here. This is great. Turn the page. So let's go to the second page and jump onto this because there's some interesting stuff here to talk about. So Bloom says, let's see. It can be objected against this theory that we never read a poet as a poet, but only read one poet in another poet, um, or even into another poet, right? So people, this is his point. He says people object to this, but this is exactly what it is. You never really read a poem. Whenever you read a poem, what you're actually reading is two poems. You're reading the poem and the poem that it came from. Now, you might not know that you're reading the poem that it came from, but because it's a version of the older poem, you're always reading two things. Because authors are in competition with each other, are responding to one another. And so he says that you always need two things. He says, we didn't hear, this is one of the most important lines in the whole thing. We deny that there is, was, or ever can be a poet as poet to a reader. So poets aren't just singular. There's always a family of poets that they're coming out of. Just as we can never embrace, sexually or otherwise, a single person, but embrace the whole of his or her family romance, so we can never read a poet without reading the whole of his or her family romance as a poet. Family romance is tricky, but this is exactly what I was talking about before with the psychology shit. If you ever fall in love with somebody and you're like, I love this person. This is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. And then you realize that when you get together with that other person, you're actually kind of marrying their whole family. Because it's a package deal, right? And even if their whole family is dead, people's families live on in their heads. You got the voice of your mom in here, you got your voice of your dad in here, you got the voice of brothers and sisters, and when you grew up, and they kind of programmed you. You can't get rid of them. You can't get your mom's voice out of your head. She built you. And so so no person is singular. When you talk to somebody, you're not just talking to them, you're talking to the whole world that they grew up in. Their whole family life has been, the dad and mom were out here, but then eventually they're in here. And when you're with somebody, you're with their whole family is somehow floating around in their head. For Bloom, this is what looking at art is. When you look at a work of art, you're not just looking at a single person. They came out of a family background. They have a father. Just like every person has a mother and a father and a family, every work of art has a string of connected earlier works of art that they're responding to. And it's why the trick for getting to know literature is to find out about all these other things. And Shakespeare is like the most common ancestor for all different kinds of art. And that's why I study him, because Shakespeare unlocks piles and piles of art. Okay. I'm not doing that. Blah, 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 blah. Nope, not doing it. Okay, here we go. Underline this. This is super important. The meaning of a poem can only be another poem. That is the one sentence. That's it. The meaning of a poem can only be another poem. If you want to know what a poem means, if you want to know what a work of art means, you have to see the earlier thing it's coming out of. Okay, I'm going to stop this here. Oh, this is exciting. I'm really having this it's all selfie stick from now on. This is very fun. Okay.